Hello to those that have found interest in this game controller. So I'd like to give you a bit of a quick overview so that you might get a better idea of whether you want to purchase it or not. First of all, we have our start, pause, and reset buttons. So this seemed to be a little bit of a point of contention with those that wanted to purchase the game controller. They weren't sure whether they'd be able to reasonably figure out where start, pause, and reset were. Several people asked for labeling, and I experimented with coloring for a little while, but that was really more work than it was worth in the end. So you got clearly labeled here S, P, and R, and those are just simple push buttons: start, pause, and reset. Then for the majority of your other buttons here, I mean, pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. I didn't label any of these since for the majority of games you'd be using overlays anyway. And then go to the sides here and you see, and here, some fairly clicky buttons. Now, I assure you that this isn't overwhelming. It is certainly more reassuring than the original, I can tell you that much. I mean, when you click down on this button, you know when it's clicked. There isn't a ton of travel, which means you can be pretty accurate. I think I've created a much better experience than originally existed there. And finally, to end it all, the joystick. On the end of the joystick, you see that I have included these knurled portions, these inset portions, which should allow for better grip, just like the original controller. And yes, the big selling point, it is indeed self-centering. This case is 3D printed. I'm printing a ton more. You see, right out of the 3D printer, it doesn't look great. So what I've been doing is I've been kind of taking off all the junk from the support material. I've been putting these prints through a couple coats of paint, and then I've been putting a sealant on. The reason that I had to put the sealant on and not just the paint is that the paint would chip easily or rub off easily. And here, with the sealant, I'm pretty confident that even if you get some fingerprints on the thing, you're not going to have to worry too much about ruining the aesthetics. The whole thing is held together by 5 screws, 2 here, 1 here, and 2 on the front. The idea with this was that you'd be able to easily take it apart, but also you get some good rigidity. I mean, you can be fairly rough with this thing and not have any adverse effects. I printed each of these things out in reasonably thick ABS plastic. I chose ABS as opposed to PLA because PLA melts at a lower temperature. I just wanted to give these things a nice long life. So aesthetically, I most certainly modeled this after the original. The major accommodations were the assembly for the joystick. Of course, you need to make it large enough that the joystick fits in there. And I didn't really like the placement of the original start, pause, and select buttons up on the top there, so I decided to put them on the bottom. I don't know if I regret that decision or not, but it's certainly a change. It also wasn't very practical to put the set of 3 buttons there. It's just much easier to deal with it as it is. Now that I've given you a bit of an overview of the outside of this controller, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the inside. Like I said, 5 screws. Here's the inside of the controller. These 2 trigger buttons are fully replaceable and easily replaceable. This is a component which I expect will be worn out pretty quickly, so I make it very easy for these to be replaced. So, what have we got on the inside here? Well, you got this joystick assembly I was talking about. It's just a reasonably priced Arduino compatible joystick with 2 10K potentiometers. All that is fed into this circuit board right here. It was made using a program called Eagle PCB. Certainly could be nicer, but it worked out. You get some imitation Zippy micro switches there, an imitation Arduino Nano, which is a bit finicky with the newer versions of Arduino, but is perfectly fine with older ones. As you can see, you can also unscrew these micro switches and replace them in case they go bad. I really do not expect them to, but it is of course always an option. You can also unscrew this assembly here. I soldered this on, so that would need to be unsoldered as well if you wanted to replace it, but I figure that start, pause, and reset are probably going to be used much more than any of these buttons generally, so I made this fairly easy to replace. Oh, and the majority of electrical connections in this larger section here, the larger button matrix, are just made by employing some very, very thin brass rod. I think it makes it look nice, although of course that's not a primary concern for something inside of the device. The cable on this thing is, as I've said previously, 1.8 meters or 5.98 feet, something like that long. which is certainly longer than the original, which is probably about a foot and a half shorter, but is not as long as it could be. So I'd like to be able to provide some extensions where that is possible, but if you're wondering the reason why I didn't make all the cables longer from the get-go, it's more than triple the price to double the length of the cable, which of course, economies of scale-wise, doesn't really make sense, but there we are. Oh, and one last thing, in terms of repairability, this entire section just pops off of there, and this button matrix is fully replaceable in the case that you would need to do so. Once again, just trying to make the life of this thing as long as possible. As you can see, it's just a little 3D printed flexible button plate, and here are all the buttons on that matrix. I'm honestly quite proud of this project. I am by no means a professional engineer by certification or by experience, and I hope that this project will bring some joy to others as the creation of it has brought joy to me. I hope this video has informed your purchase decision, whether positively or negatively. Understand that some of the little quirks with the design of this, especially stuff like the imperfect paint finish and other things, will be ironed out in the future before anyone actually receives one of these, but I finally have a fully functional, not just prototype, but finished product here. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.